Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Sister District YouTube Hangout. I'm Christine Peterson, and I'm here today with Winnie Brinks, who is our supported candidate for the Michigan State Senate. Winnie, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
We're glad to have you here. Before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to some of the Sister District groups that are supporting you. There may be others, but I know, at least in addition to the groups that are in your home state of Michigan, that you have groups supporting you across the lake in the Chicago area, where there are about a dozen or so Sister District groups supporting you. And then groups in Minnesota, in California, in Arkansas, and I hear Ethiopia even. So
wow, I haven't heard about Ethiopia yet.
You're well supported, and we want you to feel supported, and we're looking forward to getting to know you a little bit today so we can learn how to support you even better.
Great, thanks. I appreciate this opportunity.
So I thought we could just get started by you telling us a little bit about your background, your family and what you did before you became a legislator, what you like to do.
Sure. So I am married to a teacher. I have 3 daughters. They are age almost 22, almost 20, and 17. So we have a busy household. One just graduated from college at the University of Michigan. Another is a student at the University of Michigan. And our youngest is going to be a senior next year in high school. And so we've got a lot of good reasons to see women in office and making a difference in our lives, but also theirs as they start adulthood. My husband's a middle school teacher of Spanish. And we have a real bicultural household, I would say. So we have a lot of fun with that. But I think that's also an important element that helps me relate to a lot of people. Before I joined the legislature, oops, I'm losing my earphones here. But before I joined the legislature, I worked in nonprofits and in education for the better part of 2 decades. I was a caseworker. I was a paraprofessional in a local public school. And I did things like art therapy. And I was the executive director of a community-based corrections organization for several years. And you throw in some part-time work and some full-time parenting in there, and that pretty much rounds out my experience prior to the legislature. We enjoy entertaining, we enjoy gardening, just hanging around with people, cooking, sharing those kinds of experiences. So that's what we do for fun when we have time.
Great. And your home is in Grand Rapids. You've lived there for quite some time?
Yes, since college. And so I came to Michigan from the state of Washington in the 80s, the late 80s, to go to Calvin College. It's a small Christian liberal arts college. My parents were Dutch immigrants, and so this is a denominational school with deep Dutch roots. And so this is one of the places that my mom knew about and said, you should apply. So I ended up coming out here sight unseen. It's been a great experience. I've grown to love Michigan and Grand Rapids, and I've been able to have a front seat and kind of watch how it's changed over the last several years. I'm having trouble with I'm not used to using these kinds of things. So can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Okay, all right. Anyway, so it's been a great experience being here in Michigan, and the city of Grand Rapids has been a great place to live, to have a career, and to raise a family. And so we've really enjoyed our life here.
Can you help us get to know Grand Rapids a little bit? How has it shaped you as a person?
Sure. Grand Rapids is a mid-sized city. It is a city that's grown a lot in the last several years. It's become more and more progressive, which is certainly helping me in this race. We've got a growing population, which brings with it a lot of great things, but it also brings challenges. We have nearly full employment here. So economically, we are doing really well compared to some other parts of the state that have seen a contraction in population and a reduction in economic opportunities. So that's been something that's been not as much of a challenge for Grand Rapids. So we've been able to keep up with things like maintaining our infrastructure pretty well. We've been able to do things that other cities have been unable to do in terms of helping their population have access to opportunities economically, as well as in other areas like education. We had a really struggling school district for a long time. The entire city of Grand Rapids is one large public school district, and they lost tons of students over a couple of decades, and we finally managed to turn that around. And so we're seeing a lot of progress and optimism in those areas. We are still a city that struggles immensely with racial inequalities. So that's a huge challenge, and it seems to be, and I'm sure this is true elsewhere too, but particularly here, it seems to be a really tough nut for us to crack. And so that's an area where I think that we could stand to do a lot of improving. So I'm trying to be very sensitive and proactive about that when we consider policies at the state level.
And what was it that caused you to seek elected office?
So in 2012, the person who held the state house seat before me switched parties at the very last second. He lied about it. He tried to pay somebody to run a sham campaign against him so that he wouldn't have any competition. It was a scandal that went all the way up to the Speaker of the House in the state of Michigan. And so following that, there was a grand jury investigation that went on for more than a year. And so there was significant issues about a lack of integrity in our political process, but also our politicians that were representing the city of Grand Rapids. So I got a phone call from a friend of mine. I had been involved in education advocacy for several years. And a friend of mine who I met because she had students the same age as mine in the school system, she and I had been doing a lot of work going to Lansing, talking with legislators about education issues. And she happened to be chairperson of the 3rd Congressional District Democratic Party. And she called me one day and I said, I cannot believe that guy switched parties. And I've been thinking about you a lot. I said, who are you going to get to run against him? And she said, well, I'll get right to the point. We want you to do it. So my first response was, I don't think so. And she talked for 10 more minutes or so, and she's very convincing. And so I said, okay, I'll think about it. So to make a long story short, what really made me decide to get into this, though it was completely unplanned, not my intention to become a politician, it was that I really believe strongly that if we don't have people who value integrity and hard work and service, who are willing to run, then we're going to constantly end up with politicians who we don't trust, politicians who make those headlines that are undermining our government and even democracy. So, so that's really kind of what pushed me over the edge and made me jump in with both feet. But that resulted in me having to run a write-in campaign. So I said, well, what does this entail? And they said, well, you have to raise about $250,000. You have to do a write-in campaign. I can't remember what else. I said, well, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've never done this before. And they said, that's okay, we'll help you. I said, well, do you have a plan? Because I need a plan. So they handed me a document. It was about 20 pages. I read it and I said, let's do it. So that's how I got started. And then when I got into office, I remember looking around going, oh my gosh, what have I done? So it's been a huge opportunity for personal growth and a great learning experience. And I feel like it's also given me a great, a unique experience or a unique perspective on politics because I wasn't planning to go into it. And so I sort of still fancy myself an outsider, though I've been there now almost 6 years.
Well, and you have been there 6 years. What do you hear now from your constituents? What are they saying to you? What are their priorities?
So a lot of priorities that have continued throughout the time I've been there involve education and economic opportunity, which are, of course, linked together. Additionally, there's roads and infrastructure. We saw the failures that resulted in, lead poisoning of a city of Flint. It really was a failure of leadership and investment in infrastructure, and people here in Grand Rapids understand that. And so they place a high priority on us just taking responsibility for the things that the state is uniquely positioned to do, like roads and water infrastructure. In my district, the veterans home, there are 2 veterans homes that are state run in the state of Michigan, and one of them is located in my state house district. And it has a very troubled history of privatization of the direct care services, which resulted in very, very poor care for several years. And I was a very vocal voice against that and toward fixing the problems over there. And I had to really make a lot of noise for 3 or 4 years before I was listened to. And there were a couple of really bad audits that came through from the Auditor General that finally prompted some attention to that. But I get a lot of folks who are very appreciative that somebody was looking out for the guys in the home. So that's been an important accomplishment for me, I think, during this past couple of terms. Other issues, voting rights is a huge issue. A lack of trust in the legislature to do the right thing. We have, in the state of Michigan, we rank dead last with the Center for Public Integrity in terms of transparency and safeguards toward integrity in our state government. So that's been something that's been a real big issue for us. I think we've got a legislature right now that's completely unwilling to address that. So just kind of given the way I started in this whole office, people have consistently talked with me about that as a huge concern.
Okay, and you touched a little bit on your successes with the Veterans Home. Are there other things that you want to tell us about in terms of successes? And also, what are some of the challenges or the lessons that you've learned?
Sure. So the Veterans Home was a huge deal, and I'm really, it's really unfortunate that we had to see such a negative situation in order to see change there. So that was one thing that I'm really glad to have been a part of the solution. Another thing was during my first term, the legislature voted to expand Medicaid here in Michigan. And so there's about 650,000 people who now have access to health insurance that did not before. So I was just very gratified to be able to be in a position to support that. It was a very close vote in the legislature. And so our governor actually pushed for expansion, and he had to really work hard to convince his own party to support him. But it was, in the end, a true bipartisan effort, and it's just really great to know that that's there. It is, of course, under threat right now. We've got people pushing Medicaid work requirements, and apparently there's a deal that's been made between the Republicans and the governor on that. So I'm hoping that we aren't undoing that expansion of access to health care that we were able to achieve a few years ago. Another area that I worked really hard on was a bill that would give women more information about their mammograms in regards to the presence of dense breast tissue, which can mask or hide tumors and cancer. So we were able to work that bill with the help of some great advocates from my district. I introduced it, and in addition, a Republican senator introduced it. And in the end, it shouldn't surprise you to know that his bill moved and mine did not, but they were essentially the same. And he and I agreed to work together to get that done. And so I did the lion's share of the work, and we were able to get that passed. It was one of the very last votes of my first term. So I was pleased to get that done. And there are a lot of women out there who now have the information they need to get help for a breast cancer diagnosis much, much sooner. So I'm hopeful that we're saving lives.
And then have there been challenges, or what lessons have you learned along the way?
So being in the minority the entire time, and not just in the House, but our Michigan is one of those trifecta states for the Republicans, where the governor as well as both chambers are controlled by Republicans. And so it's been, initially it took a few months for me to kind of figure out my role in terms of how to make a bigger difference, because if you factor in the fact that I'm in the minority party, but then you also add sort of the reminder that I was, when I first got to the legislature, of the Republicans' wrongdoing and lack of integrity. They weren't real eager to give me any hearings on any bills or to allow me to have the microphone even. And so I had to really evaluate what the best way to make a difference for my constituents was. And so a lot of that involves sort of calling out what they're doing that's not good for our constituents, and talking with a lot of different interested groups in the community about how we can work together and who they should be talking to, in addition to the people who agree with them, about how to make real change. And so I've found too, sometimes they don't like it, but sometimes being a thorn in their side and being part of the, the true opposition that's going to stand up for the people that we represent has a lot of value. And there's times where Democrats in the minority have gotten discouraged, I think, and have not used their voice as much as they should. And I think we give up our power that way. So it's been really important for me to take a stand on those issues that are impacting people, and especially to point out where the legislature could be doing more and they're not. And that's certainly true with, that was true with the Veterans Home. It's certainly true with water issues now.
Well, and you're also have been the chair of the Michigan Women's Progressive Caucus. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the Progressive Women's Caucus was started just prior to my start in the legislature. They have a PAC on the political side, but we also do a lot of work legislatively. And it is made up of all the Democratic women in the State House and Senate. And I will add that there is only one Democratic woman in our state Senate right now. So we're working hard to change that. But yeah, so we have a whole policy agenda that deals with not just reproductive health, but women's health issues, also women's economic issues. We've pushed packages for equal pay, things like earned paid sick leave, fairer practices at work, helping people deal with the ramifications of gender violence. So we've done a lot of work introducing bill packages. We've had limited success in getting those bills passed. Sometimes we can get parts of them passed through Republican bills, but it's been a pretty hostile environment towards making progress on those issues in our legislature for the last 8 years. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. So that's the policy side. One of the things that I really feel is important for us as women in the legislature is to make sure that we provide ways, because we're only 25% of the legislature. And I think it's just really, really important for us to provide ways to support each other and to help each other understand the dynamics of power, and to do really sort of to talk to each other about how things get done in the legislature, and to help improve our skills in working with the majority party to get stuff done. So we may not get credit, and we may not get our bills passed all the time, but there are a lot of ways that we can find to work with committee chairs, to work with our counterparts on the Republican side of the aisle in a quieter way or behind the scenes, to make sure that they're not doing things that are egregiously harmful to the people that we represent. So one of the things that I prioritized when I wanted to be chairperson of that caucus was that we work to grow more leadership capacity within ourselves, so that we can increase our power both as women legislators in our own caucus, but also in the whole chamber, and then hopefully to expand that and keep moving folks up to the quote unquote upper chamber. So we've got a lot of issues with that, because the higher offices, women tend to get weeded out, right? And so men pursue the next level in politics a lot more often than women do. And I think we're finally starting to see that change nationwide, and certainly in Michigan. So one of my things that I wanted to do was to be chairperson for one term, and to set somebody else up so that they could be chair after me, so that they could have those leadership experiences, and so that we could sort of foster a deeper bench of leaders among the women in the legislature. So that's what I did for one term, my middle term. And now we have Stephanie Chang out of Detroit, who is a very capable and excellent chairperson, who's also running for Senate. So I'm happy to have been able to hand that off to somebody who was able to grow and learn from that too.
Great. Well, and now you are running for the state Senate. And can you tell us a little bit about your opponent and how you would draw the differences between the two of you?
Sure. My opponent is kind of a tried and true Republican. He's somebody who's a reliable vote for what I would call the failed policies of the last 8 years. Our roads are in the worst condition of any state in the Midwest. Our schools are consistently ranking in the bottom 10, whereas we used to rank much higher. We used to be among the best in the nation. We've had issues of water contamination and health issues related to that have made national and even world headlines under the Republican control of the legislature and the governor's office. We've had integrity issues. We've got a debacle with the unemployment agency in our state that defrauded, tens of thousands of people, and still hardly any accountability for any of those things. And so I would say my opponent would be a continuation of those kinds of policies that really don't put people first. And some clear differences in terms of issues between him and I would be not only those big picture issues, but specifically he's opposed to the legalization of marijuana, which will most likely be on our ballot if the legislature does not take that up this week. And I think, he's one of those people who seems to think that the Republicans in the legislature know better than the people do themselves about what they would like to see happen in our state. So that's an interesting angle for him. In addition, he's anti-choice. So there's, he just doesn't believe that women have the ability or right to control their own fertility or to decide when, if, where, and under what circumstances or how many children they should have or start a family. So those are going to be clear differences. I think that they'll try and use those things against me. But I would say that I'm in a unique position because I've really had 6 years of opportunity to see how not to do things in the legislature. And so I'm eager to get there into the Senate and to be able to exercise some real long-term leadership. Things like education funding. We've been chronically underfunding and pursuing all of these quote unquote reforms, mostly led by Betsy DeVos. And they've been failing us, and they seem to be willing to just stick to those for philosophical reasons at all costs. And so it's really time for that to change. And I think I'm in a good position. I've got a reputation as somebody who can work across the aisle, somebody who is concerned about long-term implications of things, not just short-term payoffs or political dividends. And so I'm eager to get started with a new governor. There's going to be about 2/3 of the Senate is going to turn over. So we'll have a whole new group of legislators, I think, who could most likely be there for 8 years. So I'm excited to get started and to see what kinds of truly long-term leadership we can put together, working with the executive, with both chambers and both parties to actually address those things that really create long-term growth and stability, like our K-12 education system and roads and infrastructure in particular.
Great. Another issue that has been mentioned by a number of sister district volunteers as being very important to them is the issue of gun violence and finding a way to stem it. Can you speak a little bit on that issue?
Yeah, so here in Michigan, we've had, in the last 3 terms that I've been there, we've consistently had a group of bills introduced that would make some of the changes that we know would be helpful in keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. And the Republicans have been unwilling to have even hearings on those things or even have that conversation. So that's been very discouraging. I think this year we've seen a renewed interest in doing something. So we do have some bills in front of us that are quote unquote non-controversial, that kind of pick around the edges, and they do some good things. So maybe we'll see a little bit of progress on providing more school counselors or physical alterations to school buildings. So they're just a little bit harder to get into. But really, there's a failure to address the heart of the issue. And I would really like to see us take a look at red flag laws where you can, still retain everybody's civil rights and due process by being able to go in front of a judge and request a temporary restraining order, so that somebody who's in a bad place in terms of mental health or has exhibited violent behavior already cannot have access to a dangerous weapon. So those are kind of simple things that I think we should be able to get bipartisan support for, but they're completely unwilling to even put them up on the agenda. So as long as we don't have the majority in either chamber, we are very limited in our ability to control the agenda and to be able to at least have hearings on those kinds of issues. So that's why it's just so important that we take at least one of the chambers and the governor's office so that we can actually get some of that stuff done. It's a significant issue, and community police relations is a significant issue as well that is related. And I would also say it's not, there's a lot of folks who want to talk about school violence, and I think that we need to be careful that we don't talk only about schools, but that we talk about gun violence in general, and we talk about mental health and suicide and veterans and access to weapons, and be able to do that in a very compassionate way. And I think that there are ways to do that where we don't impinge on people's legal rights, but we do keep them safe and their family members safe.
Okay. And I know another issue that's been important to you is the issue of water quality. You alluded to it earlier. Flint has faced a lot of troubles with that. We here in Chicago share our main source of water with you, so it's very important to us as well. And a number of the other sister district groups also have concerns about water integrity, sufficiency. Can you speak a little bit to that issue?
Yeah, sure, happy to. I've spent a lot of time reading about PFAS chemicals and the contamination of water. I know that's been an issue in Minnesota and in a lot of other states around the nation. We here in my county, Northern Kent County, we had a company who was using Scotch Guard to waterproof shoes mostly for the last few decades, several decades even, and that chemical has made its way into the well water, into the groundwater, and even into municipal water systems. We're seeing health implications that have come from that, and so we have some of the highest levels of PFAS contamination in private wells of anybody in the entire nation. We also have several military locations where the firefighting foam that was used there also has the same chemical family in it, and it has contaminated groundwater all around those military bases. And the military is actually unwilling to provide clean water for the folks that live around there who've been impacted by that. So the state has had to pick up the bill for a lot of that work, which is really not fair. But also the state and at the national level, Scott Pruitt's EPA has been completely unwilling to establish a legal limit for the presence of those chemicals in our water. And so that's really preventing states from being able to move forward and hold the responsible parties accountable. So I've done a lot of work on that. I've proposed a bill that would establish the strictest limit on PFAS in drinking water in the entire nation. We also have a resolution this past week or 2 weeks ago I introduced to get to urge the Trump administration and Scott Pruitt's EPA to release the study that they called a public relations nightmare, and then they suppressed it. But we believe that it in a report in Politico shows that it would recommend much lower levels of that chemical as being safe in drinking water. So I've done a lot of work on that, trying to make sure that we're kind of blowing the whistle on what's on their lack of action to protect the health and well-being of people as well as our water supply. So first and foremost, trying to make sure that we're getting things, getting our water supply clean so it doesn't, so that people aren't drinking poisons. But after that, we have to deal with the issue of actual cleanup of that in our drinking water and in our groundwater and in our lakes and rivers. So it's a huge task when it comes to that chemical. And that's just one of the issues with water. We, of course, have Flint that is still unresolved really in a permanent way. though there have been some improvements. There's still a lot of lead pipes there. So working to resolve that. And that's been a huge concern for people in our city, to see how the government has responded to it in a similar city in terms of age and housing stock. So those are all big issues for us here in Michigan in general. And I'll just say too, like all the Great Lakes states, I think we have an additional responsibility as guardians and protectors of the largest source of fresh water in the world, to do a better job and to be even more precautionary than potentially other places in the world about what's happening with our water. And so I take that responsibility seriously, and I think the citizens of Michigan do too. So there's huge health and economic implications for all of us.
So now we've got a couple of months before the election. What needs to happen during these next couple of months? What do you need to do, the campaign? How can we help you?
So we are really working hard to reach as many voters as possible. We're seeing new levels of engagement from people in everything from volunteering to just wanting to get involved in general and become more knowledgeable about the political process. We have ballot proposals here that are very exciting, that deal with voter rights, that deal with, there's at least 2 that have voter rights and redistricting on the ballot. So those are great motivators to get people excited and involved. We've got some really great candidates running in the Grand Rapids area. So we've been seeing a lot of synergy in terms of voters and volunteers. So that's all good stuff. We need to make sure that we're reaching every single Democrat and getting them out to vote, because we know that there are more of us than there are of them, but if we don't vote, they keep winning. And as a Democrat in an off-year election or non-presidential, that's really important for us here in the state of Michigan. That's when all of our state Senate seats are up. It's never on presidential, it never aligns with presidential, it's always on the midterm. So it's really important for control of the Senate for us to make sure that every Democrat gets out to vote. I've got parts of my district that are just solidly Dem. The city of Grand Rapids is about 65% Dem. It's also about 65% of the House Senate seat, of the Senate seat that I'm running for. And my entire House seat is within the city of Grand Rapids. So I've got a lot of voters that already know me, but the other half of the city, we have to make sure that they know who I am and that we have a great shot of winning this Senate seat. And so we've got to get to those sort of complacent Democrats in the solidly Democratic areas. And then on the other third of my Senate seat that we're trying to reach voters over there, we've got some discouraged Democrats who haven't had a chance to vote for a Dem that can actually win for many, many years. So we want to make sure that they understand that every vote matters, even if their little neighborhood doesn't go Dem. We still need their vote for these state Senate seats and all of our statewide offices. So it's going to be really important for people to turn out. So we're working hard to reach all of them. So that involves a lot of door knocking and phone calling. We'll start mail as we get a little bit closer to the election. We're likely to go up on TV because this is one of the target seats. It's going to be very expensive. So we're doing a lot of fundraising right now and just knocking on doors every single day that we can.
Well, I know we are all expecting to help you or committed to helping you with the postcarding, the phone baking, the canvassing, and you mentioned the fundraising. One thing that's sometimes helpful for people to hear is to get a more concrete understanding of where their money goes. For example, if somebody donates $20 or $50 or $100, like what would you do with that and how would that help you?
Sure. So right now we're in the, we're really heavily into knocking on doors. And so I just this week did another order of canvassing literature. And we figured that's about 6 cents a piece at the amount that we were ordering. I think we were ordering 20,000 pieces. And so for about $20, you'll get about 300 pieces of literature, more or less. And that 300 will get us through about one day of knocking on a weekday with just 4 of us out. And so that's, a pretty modest amount compared to what we need. We're going for, I think we have a goal of knocking about 100,000 knocks before the election. So we've got a lot of $20 to go to make it to that number. Let's see, $50 would get us about 7 shirts, t-shirts, that kind of thing for parades and for our volunteers and door knockers, so that when you approach a door, people know you're not selling them windows or trying to get them to, do some sort of home improvement. So those are really helpful amounts to kind of get your head around in terms of what that buys. Of course, we'll be moving on to signs. We'll have to order new signs. Can't use my state house ones this year again, so we'll have to invest again in a whole group of new signage. So that will cost several $1,000s total. Every month we have office space where there's a constant buzz of volunteers and interns and staff working, coming and going 6 days a week. So that costs us about $800 a month. So those are the kinds of things that we need to be able to pay just to keep the campaign rolling. And that doesn't even include sort of our advertising and our mail program. A typical mail piece that will go out to several thousand people in a district that would be targeted based on interest and all kinds of data that we have, or topic like the environment or education or veterans issues, or you name it, whatever sort of messaging we're putting out there. Those kinds of things will cost for an entire Senate district upwards of $10,000 just to reach folks with those mailings, and we'll do probably 10 of those different kinds of mailings throughout the campaign. So all of that will kind of get loaded in those weeks right before the election, in the last 2 months, when the mail will start to hit. And so that's when you feel like you're just burning money at that point, because all the bills are big and they all have to go out fast, and all of the things are really, really important to do. So we're trying to get a head start on that. We're trying to raise $350,000 just as a campaign. We've got other allies and statewide groups and the Senate Democratic Caucus and folks like that who will chip in. We think this race could easily be over $1 million. Would not be surprised if it's $1.5 million total, with all of that friendly spending and helpful independent expenditure kinds of things coming in on our behalf. So the pressure on us to raise money and to get out and talk to voters is huge. So, money is of course important. The Republicans generally outraise us. Right now in their leadership funds, we just saw a report that they have outraised us by 6 to 1. They can make phone calls to folks like the DeVos family here in town, and they can, get tens of thousands of dollars from 8 or 10 of the DeVos family members and funnel that into one campaign. And it takes us, months to raise that kind of money. So we're definitely at a disadvantage when it comes to the financial side of things. And this legislature has made it even easier. They doubled the campaign finance limit. So all of those folks who maxed out, they went back and they doubled it. So it's just put us at a huge disadvantage to them. But I like to say we are always outworking them. We've done more doors in my state house district than I think any other district in the entire state for the last 5 years. I think we have over 160,000 knocks in the bank that we know that those will help us win this Senate seat and retain the House seat that I've been holding. So we feel really good about our work ethic and our past investment in people and in I guess they may have money, but we have heart, and we've got a lot of feet on the ground and a lot of people talking to voters.
Great. Well, Winnie, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us? Anything that we should have asked?
So one thing that's interesting, I've alluded to Betsy DeVos a couple of times. She's our new Secretary of Education at the national level, and she's been pursuing what I would put in quotes, education reforms here in the state of Michigan for a couple of decades. Some of her bad ideas are part of the reasons why I started advocating on education issues to begin with. And she continues her outsized influence here in the state of Michigan, both with her finances and her policy ideas. and she happens to be a resident of the Senate seat I'm running for. So it would be very gratifying to make sure she has a Democratic representation who doesn't agree with her in the state Senate. In addition, the very first woman ever to serve in the state Senate in the state of Michigan is from the Grand Rapids area. She was a suffragist. She was active on issues of education and what she called then teachers' pensions, mothers' pensions, but teacher raises. And so she did a lot of great work. Oh, I'm having trouble with my earphones again. But she, I think she may be one of 2 women who has her portrait in the Capitol. The other thing to note is that that is the last time we've had a woman in the state Senate from the city of Grand Rapids. So it's been nearly 100 years since we've had a woman represent Grand Rapids in the state Senate. So we think it's time to change that. I'll add, let's see, for the last 35 years, this Senate seat has been held by a Republican, and we are working hard to make sure that that changes. We know that the demographics of the district have become more progressive, and the last time a Republican, well, they won in 14, but when they first won, this same person won in 10. He really won by a small margin in a year that was a Republican wave year. So he kind of squeaked through, but we really believe that this district is Democratic, and so it's high time for it to flip. And so we think we're in an ideal position to make that happen, despite some of our monetary disadvantages. So we're very excited about the potential, and nobody works harder than Winnie Brinks. So we are very optimistic that we'll be successful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that inspiration. It's great to hear. Do you want to give your website in case people want to get more information?
Sure. My website is winniebrinks.com. My email is winnie@winniebrinks.com. And if you happen to know any of the names of my campaign staff, that's the same formula there. So you're welcome to communicate with us at any time. We take suggestions too. I know sometimes the websites get a little bit slim and maybe don't give you all the information that you really want if you're interested in a specific issue. So feel free to reach out to us and we'd be happy to give you more info. Yeah, I guess I just want to say thank you to all of you at Sister Districts. You guys have been fantastic to work with, and it's been really inspiring for me and really fun to see all the different groups weigh in on Twitter and on Facebook, and just really be encouraging nationwide. It's really can be kind of a lonely thing sometimes to run in a competitive race because you know, there's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, you work a lot, and sometimes it feels like you're the only one, you know, in your own little bubble. So it's great to know that I have friends nationwide who are rooting for me and rooting for the causes that we care about, and trying to make sure that we have good representation for the voices that aren't being heard right now in our legislature.
Thank you. And thanks to everyone for tuning in and watching this. Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.